Good evening and welcome to the Assembly of Osteopathic Graduate Medical Educators, or AOGME's webinar on understanding your residency agreement. We are pleased to have Susan Sanford from Trinity Health with us today to present on this topic. My name is Alenta Long, Executive Director of AOGME. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. The webinar recording will be posted on the AOGME's webinars webpage shortly. All webinar participants are in listen-only mode. If you experience technical issues during the webinar, please use the chat feature and we will assist you. If you have questions during the webinar for our presenter, please feel free to submit them anytime through the Q&A feature. If time permits, during or at the end of the webinar, our speaker will respond to your questions. We are very pleased today to have Ms. Susan Sanford with us. Ms. Sanford has worked extensively in healthcare workforce development, implementation, project management, recruitment, and retention for over 25 years. She works closely with hospital administrators to address medical staffing needs and has created innovative programs to attract and retain physicians in Michigan communities and communities within the Trinity system. Susan is passionate in her work with medical education programs to provide resources regarding how staff transition. Again, we're very pleased to have Ms. Sanford speaking with us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Susan.
Thank you, Alenta. Thanks for the introduction. I'm happy that you're all joining us today because it is a very exciting time for you. You're wrapping up your medical education and you're about to launch into your residency programs. Recently found out, through the match program where you're going to be going, and your minds are already starting to spin. What's next? So Alenta asked me to put together a program for you. I'm going to try to condense my material into, 40-45 minutes. She was kind enough to give me some of the questions that have already been posed when you registered for the program, and I'm going to be weaving those into my presentation today. But certainly there'll be ample time at the end to ask questions as well. So what are we going to do today? I'm hopeful that in talking through this with you that you'll get a little bit better understanding of what the institutional requirements are for the programs that you're joining. In addition, I hope that we'll give you a pretty good visual, a good idea of what you can expect to see in your residency agreements. Many of you have probably already seen drafts and samples. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about, the process, what you can expect now that you've matched. What is the process that's going to be used in your programs and in the human resource departments to onboard you so that you are ready to go on July 1. So let's talk just a little bit about general comments regarding your residency agreement. Many questions that Alenta forwarded to me. I didn't count them, but I'm guessing there were a good 25 questions around this one topic here. Unfortunately for you, or maybe it's fortunate because it would be overwhelming if these things were negotiable, residency agreements are very standard and very uniform. They are not tailored. They're tailored to you by your name, and they are not negotiable. So although you might feel quite anxious about this process, or maybe you're anxious about the fact that it's not negotiable, it is what it is. My kids are grown now, but I used to say you get what you get and you don't throw a fit, right? That's going to be the case with your residency agreement. But regardless, you need to read them, you need to understand, and you need to understand that much of this is driven by the institutional requirements that institutions are required to bake into your agreement. The other reason I think it's really important to read these and understand is many of the provisions that we're going to talk about today, believe it or not, are pretty standard provisions that you're going to see in your first contract post-residency. So I know it's probably not what you're thinking about right now, but honestly, that's a big area of expertise for me. And that is when you leave your GME programs and you're taking your first position, your first career move out of training. I think this is a great training phase for you to get used to some of that standard language that you're also going to see in your first agreement post-residency or fellowship. Okay, so one thing you might have already gotten, and many of you won't be surprised, that a lot of the residency contracts are already posted on the program's websites. If not, they're forwarded to you prior to the interview day, or they're given to you on the interview day. So these provisions that we talked through today may not come as a surprise if you've already gone through that process, you've already gone through the match, you probably already have a draft, probably not the real deal in your hand already, but they're very templated, they're very standard. Okay, what we're going to go through is we're going to go through some very specific titles that you're probably going to see. We're going to talk about lengths of it. We're going to talk about the format and the flow of the contracts that you probably will get into your hands. All right. Now, these things do vary from institution. So when I say non-negotiable, I mean that if you've matched to a program and you're going there, you're not going to be able to negotiate that agreement. But for those of you that looked and compared and contrasted contracts, you do know that they vary from institution to institution. You know, the titles vary, how long it is, the format in which they present it to you does vary from institution to institution. Okay, but here's just kind of a common layout of a resident agreement. At the beginning of your agreement, it's going to talk about who are the parties. So this is between the name of the program, the name of the institution, and you. And then oftentimes you will have recitals. Recitals in the contract, you know, they oftentimes start with the word whereas. Whereas, you know, hospital is or program is, and I'll tell you what they are. Student, and they might say your name is, resident is, and then they talk about what you're trying to conclude together. So they're just little small paragraphs painting the basics, giving you the background of who's entering into the contract and what you hope to achieve. Okay, very, very common provision is going to talk about resident duties and responsibilities. You're going to see information there on hospital duties, termination, financial support, benefits, lots of miscellaneous provisions, signature page, and then some attachments. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk through kind of this flow, and we're going to go, I've organized my thoughts according to the institutional requirements, okay? So the first one we're going to dive into is the resident responsibilities. So when you see this area in your contract, what you're usually going to see is, you know, maybe 10 or 12 different subsections or bullets. Occasionally, it won't be in the body of the agreement, but it will be attached as an exhibit, okay? The section heading, it's going to vary. You know, I pulled out a handful of them before the presentation today, and I saw these names on it: resident requirements, duties of residents, obligations of residents. So that the titles are going to allude to the same type of information, but they're not going to be verbatim. The institutional requirements don't tell them what to call the section. It just says you must have a section on resident responsibilities. Okay, so what is in here? You know, unfortunately, you're going to get into reading these responsibilities and you might be sadly disappointed because there's not a lot of detail in here. You know, what you see are little paragraphs, A, B, C, D, E, 1, 2, 3. Like I said, each of these subsections are bullets, and you see lots of action words. Okay, things like you must comply, you must maintain, assume, develop, consider, and they're pretty high level responsibilities. Okay, I'm going to run that description right along parallel with what you're going to see when you finish up your training and you go out and get your first position. Same thing in your first employment contract. It's going to be general responsibilities. Unfortunately, even employment contracts don't give the details of the days, the hours, the clinic, the OR time. Usually they're pretty high level, really action. You know, I don't want to call them puffery, but they're kind of just good team player, HR, you know, pretty templated job description type duties. Okay, but it is a requirement and they have to be in all of your program agreements. All right, the next section that you might see are you know, what is the duration of the appointment? So what you're typically seeing here is a section called term and termination, okay? Typically what you're signing is where you're coming in year 1, PGY 1, and it'll talk about your first year agreement, and then it'll tell you what you must do or what conditions must be met before you can be advanced to a PGY 2. So typically what you're signing is a 1-year agreement. And then there are some very specific terms that talks about how it may not be renewed. Okay, so whether you're put on a performance improvement plan, if they've given you any type of notice, sometimes it actually lists you have to maintain or meet these 4 things before you can be advanced to a PGY2. But typically what will happen is you sign this for a year, and then the May of the next year, they're going to work on sending out the documents for your PGY2, PGY3 years. Okay. Also in this section, you will see very detailed information on how the contract can be terminated, okay? It'll have very specific ways that it can be terminated for cause, okay? You may even see examples in there, you know, for cause examples might be if you fail to meet the requirements, if you refuse to perform. Okay, if it's talking about a non-renewal process, it might talk about the requirement of giving a 90-day or 120-day notice. Okay. Occasionally, not always, there will be clauses in there that will allow the contract to be terminated without cause. Okay, maybe you've had a change of heart, or maybe there's mutual termination. I've actually seen physicians change programs. You know, they start out in emergency medicine, they decide they want to go to surgery, or vice versa. Okay, so there may be ways that you can terminate the agreement without cause or mutually. Okay, and those will be spelled out very specifically. Flowing right along, next thing you're likely to see is area in the contract that talks about the financial support. Okay, compensation. It'll talk about your annual salary. Sometimes the annual salary is called a stipend. It'll talk about the fact that these are all W-2 income, and they run it through payroll, and that means that they're taking out taxes on you. Okay, I think this was another common theme that I saw in the questions were, how can I negotiate? Salaries aren't negotiable. For an institution, for a program, they have their PGY1 compensation, their PGY2, their PGY3, and so on. Now, PGY1 compensation at one institution does not mean it's going to mirror at another one. These are very market driven. Okay. I live in Michigan. So what you might get offered in Grand Rapids, Michigan is different than you might get offered in Ann Arbor. Why? Ann Arbor is a very costly area to live. So the compensation for residents and fellows in that area are probably some of the highest ones we see. Okay. Now, the other thing I will tell you that I've seen in this compensation section is I have seen, not always, but I've seen some programs where they actually have like cost of living raises. So what they do is they tell you going in, this is the PGY1, PGY2, PGY3, but those scales or those ranges go up every year and they get adjusted. I know that's the case with one of our programs in Grand Rapids, where they bake in a couple % increase every year, which is nice. But again, it's not expected, and it's not an automatic in every program that you would be applying for or going into. In addition to the actual compensation, the annual compensation in this section, you're also going to see a list, and usually they're bullets or little paragraphs on what other benefits they offer. Okay. These are not standardized. These are not ones that are consistent from program to program. We have programs that offer, all of your on-duty meals. You get to go to the cafeteria and swipe. We have programs that give a little bit of CME versus a lot of CME. Sometimes it's a limited dollar amount. Sometimes it's very specific of what it can be used for. Payment to get your educational limited license, or paying for some professional association dues. I've actually read residency agreements in very high cost of living areas. California, for example, Trinity Health has a program out there, and in some instances, they've given housing allowances. Or in very large metropolitan areas where parking is really troublesome and you have to pay for parking, I've actually read residency agreements that you get stipends for parking or public transportation. And then occasionally I've even seen stipends in residency contracts for moving. How you move from where you went to medical school to take your residency. They're not, I don't want to say they're not consistent, they're not uniform, they're not standard. So these are things that if you're sitting down with some of your fellow students and you're comparing and contrasting, you guys are going to see similar paragraphs, but maybe some different allowances and some different benefits that aren't included. All right. Now, not to confuse this with, I think the next section, actually, I'll skip one right here, not to confuse it with this type of insurance, because I know these type of benefits was a common theme also in the questions that were forwarded to me. Sometimes they're in the financial support section. Okay. And sometimes they're in a separate sheet of paper. What I'm talking about is when you take a new job anywhere, residency aside, you're looking at what are the benefits that they offer you. Okay. Oftentimes you will see language in here that says you get the same benefits that all the other staff members of this hospital get. They may change from time to time. Very common provision. And what they do is then they give you an outline or a summary or some sort of table looking document that tells you what the benefit is, who's paying for it, and what the coverage is. Okay, so what things are you looking for? You're looking for, you know, do you have health insurance, vision insurance? Do you have dental insurance? Do they have disability insurance, short-term and long-term? Do they have life insurance? Okay, do you have the opportunity to participate with a 401k or a 403b where you can save money on a pre-tax basis? Okay, these are very standardized things to your institution. Again, they may vary from institution to institution. They aren't negotiable, but what you need to do is you need to sit down and understand them and say, do these meet my needs? If not, what am I going to do? Okay, let me give you an example of how this also is very important after you take your residency and then you transition into the job market. Same thing, your future employer may have benefits that are they're just a bang up all-inclusive plan, and you're looking at another job where they're less inclusive. You really can't get short-sighted and see which of those packages you know, contribute the most to your overall compensation, because benefits are very valuable. All right. I also wanted to address in this section, there were a few questions in here regarding time off. There was some language in the questions here in regards to maternity leave. To be honest with you, all of that's going to be addressed in this kind of the benefit, the general fringe benefit section that you're going to be looking at. All right. Maternity leave oftentimes is under short-term disability. So what you need to be looking at if you're considering, you know, starting a family and you're going to take a leave, there's oftentimes confusion between FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, which says if the employer has 50 or more employees, they have to allow you up to 12 weeks off and keep your position open. That's very different than short-term disability, meaning how am I going to get paid while I'm off? And that differs according to what your residency agreement requires from you. And really, some of this is worked out with the program director as to which rotations are you going to be on. Will those have to be made up? Will you have to make up the time? Okay, so when you're looking at leaves, you're going to have to be looking at both the human resources benefit documentation, and then you're also going to have to be looking into what your agreement says in regards to leaves of absence. Okay, fair amount of questions on that. All right, wanted to go back to this section here. This is one of the institutional requirements. There has to be a laid out section that talks about what's the grievance and due process. Okay, sometimes it's a whole separate section in the contract. Sometimes it's in the termination section. And what it does is it really details out if there's a grievance, what is the process that needs to be followed? Okay, or maybe it's you following a grievance. Maybe it is the employer putting you on a performance improvement plan. So it'll talk about the very specific steps. Okay, within 14 days, this has to happen. Within 30 days, this has to happen. It talks about when it will be reviewed. It will talk about any potential disciplinary actions. It will talk about what the terms would be if you're going to be dismissed from the program or if there's going to be any non-renewal of your agreement. Okay, and I think there were a fair amount of questions on this as well. I think I'm going to answer a couple of them right now. Believe it or not, there was a couple of very specific questions. And one of them was, what are the scenarios in which a residency program would not renew a contract for the resident? All of you would be getting, I think it's most commonly called eligibility and selection policy. And in there, it tells you the qualifications that you have to maintain in order to stay in that program. Those things are going to be listed pretty clearly in this area here where it talks about residents' obligations and duties, okay? And in here, it's going to talk about the conditions that must be met. So when you ask this question about what are the scenarios in which they won't renew the contract, you have to be saying, am I meeting the requirements, and am I not meeting the conditions? If so, what is the term and termination policy say so that I understand how I could be dismissed from this program? Okay. All right, there was another very specific question in relation to this, and it was, could a hospital let a resident go solely due to the visa issues? Okay, the word visa issues, I'm not sure exactly what one meant by that, but realize that some programs do not accept those on visas, okay? If the program will take those with visas, really the only way they're going to let a hospital or let a resident go or have to terminate the contract is if going through the immigration process, there are issues. So I don't think they would let you go solely on the fact that you have a visa issue, unless the issue is that you do not get or obtain your statement of need from your home country. And I have seen that happen, where as soon as you match into the program and they're getting that paperwork initiated, that, you know, they send that offer letter out or that contract out and you don't get your statement of need from your home country. If you don't get that, then they would either not offer you a contract or they would have to terminate a contract because then you do not meet the eligibility requirements. Okay, and there was one last question here about termination that kind of came up, and it was a specific question relative to drug screening, believe it or not. And it was a question about can they revoke your offers or terminate your contract if you fail hair drug screens? Okay, and the answer to that is yes. And I know this might be a big topic now that there's many states that have legalized the use of marijuana. Even though a state legalizes the use of marijuana, employers have their policies and have their protocols. And if you are in violation of theirs and you fail a drug screen, and they say you know that's a disciplinary approach, or maybe there's a warning and then maybe there's a random, then yes, if you don't meet their eligibility and their selection process requirements because you failed a drug screen, yes, they can terminate your contract. Okay. So lots of questions regarding termination, but my gut's telling me those are going to be fairly lined out and there aren't going to be any surprises, because they can't just, unless it's something where patients are in safety's in jeopardy or something where it would be immediate termination or lose your license or there's something regulatory. For the most part, I think that you're going to see, oh, these are the criteria, this is the evaluation process, this is the grievance process, this is the process of going on a performance improvement plan. I don't think you're just going to be willy-nilly, your contract's going to be revoked or terminated. Okay. All right, I skipped over this section as well, but in your contract, you're going to see an area that discusses your professional liability insurance. This is your malpractice insurance. Okay. Two places it can be found. It can be either found in the body of the contract under a paragraph that says professional liability insurance or malpractice insurance. Sometimes it's actually in the benefits section, or it's on that separate summary of benefits that they have attached. Okay, I want to give you just a little bit of detail on this because this is something that's going to serve you well as you go through training and after you leave. I just want to explain the three different types of malpractice insurance. All right, there's occurrence-based malpractice insurance. Occurrence-based malpractice is very common in very large organizations that are self-insured. Okay, they have layers upon layers of insurance. Occurrence-based is kind of the cream of the crop, because in occurrence-based malpractice says that everything that occurs, okay, while you work for them, regardless of when a claim is made, is covered. So if you're in your residency for 3 years and you have occurrence-based malpractice, you graduate and you take a job, and out here 1 year post-graduation, someone brings up a claim that occurred when you had occurrence-based, you are covered. You do not need this thing called tail coverage. Okay, claims-made insurance is just the opposite. Whatever insurance you have when the claim is made. So if you're in your residency for 3 years, you leave, and out here in fourth year, someone makes a claim for something that occurred while you had claims made. whatever insurance you have when the claim is made is what covers you. So when you have claims made insurance, you have to have something called tail coverage. Tail coverage picks up from the time you leave, okay? Any claim that's brought up after you leave through the statute of limitations. And then the third type is called modified claims made. And from a coverage standpoint, it is very much like occurrence-based. The only difference is the employer bought claims made insurance, but they pre-buy the tail coverage, so it's cheaper for them. So they bought claims made and they modified it by pre-buying the tail coverage. Okay, so when you're looking through this area, look for those words: occurrence-based claims made, modified claims made. Look for words that, we cover everything within the scope of this agreement, or cover all acts within the scope of during your residency. And then also look for words like extended reporting endorsement. That's just another word for tail coverage. Okay, I will tell you, as residents and fellows, everything that you do while you're in training is going to be covered. So this is something you're not going to have to worry about, okay? But when you graduate and you apply for your first job and you're going through that credentialing process, you are going to have to supply documentation of where you did your training program and what insurance you have. It's called the declaration page or a certificate of insurance. Okay, so tuck that information in, because the entire time that you are doing your residency or fellowship, you are going to be covered. It will become important when you apply for your first job, because you'll need to show that documentation. And it's also going to become important when you review your first job contract, because residencies cover all the time. All employers don't. So then that's when you have to get real versed in what type of insurance you have and whether you have the risk of having to buy tail coverage. Okay. Let's see, we went through that one. Let's talk about time off. Okay, this is something, again, that's probably going to be on that attached job description or that benefit summary. Maybe there's a separate section, but it's really going to spell out how many paid days off that you have, and it's going to spell out how they can be used. Okay, so I put the example of 20 days. Okay, it might talk about, I will tell you, I read a residency agreement that had assigned vacation, meaning they took all of their residents and you didn't get to put in a vacation request. It told you when your vacation was assigned to you, and that's how they managed their residents. Okay, other ways that it can be used: maybe it can't be used during certain rotations. Maybe it can't be used so many days in a row. Maybe there's a cap. It can only be used 5 or 7 days as a row. Okay, and honestly, it's pretty common to see a paragraph in here about your benefits that you use it in accordance to the hospital benefit policy. Because keep in mind, your contract is with the residency program, but you are an employee, and so you are bound by all of the hospital policies. All right. Oh, I did want to mention one other thing right here, just looking at my notes from professional liability insurance. Some of you will be allowed to moonlight, some of you will not. That will be addressed in your residency contract. Sometimes if you get a year or 2 under your belt, you're going to be able to go out and get your permanent license, and you might be able to start moonlighting, maybe at an urgent care clinic or doing some health screenings or something like that. So whether you're allowed to do that is going to vary from program to program. But I can tell you that if you moonlight and you are allowed to moonlight, you will, 1, have to get their permission to do it, and 2, any malpractice that they are covering for you during your residency program does not cover moonlighting activities. So be very careful. I worked with a resident one who was allowed to moonlight. He went and worked in an urgent care for about 9 months and did not realize that. He went into his first position and we asked for a certificate of insurance, and he didn't have it because he didn't know it was required. So he had to go back and buy tail coverage just in case anything came up during those 9 months, because your future employer isn't going to want to cover those things. So your residency doesn't want to cover things that are outside the scope, and certainly your future employer is not going to want to do that either. Okay. All right, let's talk about what else you're going to see. We talked about these plans. I kind of talked about maternity leave and paid time off. I kind of alluded to the fact of Family Medical Leave Act. I think there's a big confusion sometimes amongst women who maybe are going off to have a baby. Family Medical Leave Act just tells you're allowed to have the time off, but it doesn't tell you how you're going to get paid, or it doesn't tell you how your residency program is going to account for the time that you're off. Do you have to make it up, or it is allowed time off? Okay, benefits that you should be looking at, just to give you a little bit of a hit list: health, dental, vision. You're going to want to see if they have life insurance, short-term and long-term disability. And then again, do they have any type of opportunities for you to save money for retirement? Maybe on a pre-tax basis, maybe there is an opportunity for your employer to do a matching program. And then you also want to see if there's any vesting requirements, meaning you have to work here so many years before you get the money that the employer put in. You always get to take away the money that you put in. Okay, but is there money that they match that you don't have until you've worked there for so many years? I think it would be 3 to 5 years, and with the residency programs being at least 3 years, I think you'd be all set. All right, let's see. Wanted to make sure. I think we talked a little bit about the paid time off here, just some other comments about the paid time off. Not only does it, give you the number of days, it tells you how you can be used. There might be very specific things in there as you're getting close to graduation. It might talk about how you can use days off for interviews for your first job. Okay, or taking board exams for those of you that are going into programs where family medicine, you might be taking your boards in April or prior to graduation. You need to be very specific of, am I taking these off for continuing medical education? Am I taking these days off as personal days? But they'll give you very detailed, are they vacation days, CME days, or personal days? Okay. Also in this section, you might see language that talks about whether or not you can take your vacation at the end of your program. Okay, we think of residency programs that end on June 30th, and it's not unusual for a resident to say, oh, well, I'm going to be done on the 21st because I'm using my last 8 vacation days or 9 vacation days. So just keep in mind too, for those of you that might at the tail end want to be wrapping things up early, some programs will let you use your vacation at the tail end. Others will put strict requirements that you can't take them the last so many days of your program. All right, little bit repetitive here, but again, talking about the effects of leaves of absences. And I kind of already referred to some of this, where oftentimes it'll refer to policies that talk about very specific requirements for completion of the program, whether it's the number of days, the number of months, the number of rotations. Oftentimes there's a paragraph in here that really allows for some discretion between you and the program director, depending upon where you are in the stage and the process of your training. When you need to take time off, there will be some allowances where they will allow you and the program director to come up with, either making up the time, allowing you to have some unpaid time off, or in some instances, you don't have to make up time because, I've had ladies go on vacation, or maternity leave, where they were off for 3 weeks and they came back right away. So they used their vacation, they're back to work, and then their program was not extended at all. Okay, just a little tidbit on this. In employers, don't think a lot of this. This is not troublesome to employers if you have some sort of, leave of absence during, as long as you can explain it. Okay, so when you're taking these things, or when you're going through residency, do think of how it's impacting you in your residency program as far as completion and criteria, meeting requirements and whatnot, but also think about how this might look on paper when you're applying for your first job. Okay, very common for us to see, not graduating on June 30th, instead graduating August 7th because I took a maternity leave and I was off 6 weeks and I had to make it up. Okay, those are very common. I've seen folks that have taken personal leaves for other reasons. Maybe there's a family member that's sick. Maybe there's someone that was going, I've had residents. I mean, you just can't predict the things that you're going to go through, personal problems, that's going to cause you to be off. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying if it happens to you, think about what it means during your residency, but also think about how you're going to explain that on paper to a potential employer, because they will want to know why you're off cycle. Okay, and they will be probably talking to your program director to also confirm, geez, this is what they told me while they were off cycle. Is that the truth? Okay. Oops, sorry. I think I had a couple questions I wanted to bring up here really quick. This is a question, or at least a comment, regarding maternity leave. Maternity leaves and other types of leave of absences are also determined and spelled out according to the medical board of each specialty and may or may not be stated in a clause or on the contract. True. There's a few great comment. There are actually definitely things in your residency contract that are dictated by requirements of the specialty board. Of whether time off is offered, whether it's allowed, and what that means for your board. So thank you for sharing that comment. Another question or comment: if your contract states the program can refuse promotion for cause, can the residency refuse to promote if you reach out about having second thoughts about the program specialty, and what does for cause include? If you are having second thoughts about your specialty choice, no, I don't think that would be a reason for cause. I think that would be mutual agreement. I don't think that's going to raise any flags. If you're not meeting the requirements, those would be for cause. If you've been put on a disciplinary action, okay, those would be for cause. Not because you had a change of heart in the type of specialty, okay? Maybe you're not passing evaluations. You will be going through multiple levels of evaluation during your program, and you will be very clear to you as to whether you're meeting those expectations or not. Okay. Some of them are clinical thresholds. Some of them are non-clinical thresholds as it relates to working in an interdisciplinary team, for example. Okay. There's behavioral things that are in here for cause. Okay, there are legal things that are in here for cause. Okay, maybe something in the medical staff bylaws you're in violation of. Maybe something happened with your malpractice and you're uninsurable. That would be a for cause termination. Maybe you've been convicted of a felony. Maybe there have been crimes related to your ethical behavior or unethical behavior. Misappropriation of drugs or drug use. Okay, those are for cause. They are very black and white. If you do this, you can be terminated for cause. Okay, these things in here are usually not very discretionary. There's a measuring stick and you know what it is going in. Okay, good questions. All right, let's talk about, we're kind of winding down on the sections here. Actually, this was it was kind of the comment that just came up. There's oftentimes information in here that's very specific about your eligibility for specialty board examinations. Usually it's found under the section, just like there's a section about the residents' responsibilities, there's usually one about the hospital's responsibilities or the program's responsibilities. Okay, and there's some very general statements in there that they're saying that they are going to meet all the eligibility requirements for you. So they're attesting to the fact that they are going to provide all of the education, all of the training, so that you can meet those board examination specialty requirements. This is a big topic oftentimes in the group with GME leaders that I am at. I don't know if you realize it, but they want you to be successful. Okay, they don't want to hold you back. They want you to graduate. They want you to take these board exams. That really makes their program look good. So they will do everything possible to make sure that they're not only meeting the eligibility requirements and training you, but they're actually helping you so that you can pass those exams and you can progress from PGY1 to PGY2, and you can make it through all the steps that you need to do to go through your promotion, and then also take your exams and be eligible for your specialty societies. Okay. All right. This is a hot one. Many of you guys are much younger than me, but I lived through these days where there was a lot of discussion over how many hours that the residents were working. So there's language now that's baked right into your contract under resident responsibilities. There's somewhat general terms. It'll talk about the fact that you need to be alert and they need to promote patient safety. And then it also usually very specifically refers to the policy that it meets the ACGME or ACOGME requirements, but it's usually in the resident responsibility section. This is also the section in which you would see whether you're allowed to do moonlighting. It will talk about the restriction of hours. Moonlighting, it might say, that you can do it with approval. And again, some programs don't even allow you to do that. As I indicated, you have to have your own liability insurance. One thing that you should know if you are in a program that does allow you to moonlight, that the moonlighting actually counts in the duty hours. So if there's a restriction of hours, you moonlighting has to be documented, and all encompassing has to make sure that you're within that number. Okay. And again, the duty hours, moonlightings, it has to comply with all the institutional policies and the program policies about, your assignments, your rotations, the evaluations, the logs. They're all part of your duties, and they're going to be very outlined in the resident responsibilities. So those are the very specific ones that you will see outlined that really tie to the institutional requirements. And then toward the end of your contract, and again, this mirrors employment contracts. So I feel like they're doing a nice job of really preparing you of what the flow of an employment contract for your first position is going to look like. Because at the tail end of your residency contract, you're going to see some of these provisions. Okay, they're very standard. Confidentiality, it's going to talk about proprietary information, it's going to talk about health information, it's going to talk about HIPAA. Okay, and it's going to talk about all the things that you learn by the nature of working in that hospital. Okay, you might learn their financial position, you might learn their strategic direction. All of those things have to remain confidential. Okay. Your agreement will say this is the entire agreement. If it's not in here, it's not part of the deal. Now, keep in mind, peppered through all of your agreement here, it might be referring to policies and procedures. So there might be medical staff bylaws that talk about policies and procedures, and you are a member of the medical staff, so those are going to apply to you, right? And it might apply to human resource policies and procedures. So those things are still part of this agreement because they're referred to. But what that means, if there's something that came up during the interviews or something that came up that you thought you heard or you thought they were providing, but it's not in writing, it's not part of the agreement. All right. Assignment. These are personal services agreements. So it's between me and Andrew. Okay. Andrew can't decide, you know what, I decided I'm going to swap places with this other resident because I want to be there and they want to be here. These are non-transferable. Okay. Governing law. You'll oftentimes see the laws of Michigan, Kent County apply. Just in case there is any dispute, we know ahead of time, how are we going to settle this dispute? Is there an arbitration? Is there a third party that's going to come in and help us go through the process of a binding arbitration process, and they're going to come to a binding agreement? Or if we're going to fight this in court, what court system, what county, what state? Waiver. Waiver, most of the time, this provision is very small, a little bit confusing because it talks about waiver of breach. And what this means is that if during the term of your agreement, you're breaching the agreement or they're breaching the agreement and you, one or the other of you just tolerated it. Okay, they could have disciplined you, but they didn't. Or maybe you could have, claimed that they were, breaching the contract and you didn't. It doesn't mean you waived your right. So there's nothing in here that says if there is an act of breach and you don't bring it up within 90 days, you waived your right. You could wait 2 years and you could say this happened 2 years ago and you never waived your right. Okay. Non-discrimination, it's going to be in these agreements. It's going to be in your employment agreements. They're very, very standard agreements. And then very common to have a notices provision. Throughout your residency agreement and post-residency in your employment agreement, there's going to be a series of provisions that are going to require you to give them notice if this happens or provide notice if this happens. Okay, the notices provision at the end of your contract just simply tells you what's an acceptable form of notification. So can you lay it on their desk? Do you have to send it to them, return receipt, certified mail, return receipt requested? Is a fax okay? Is an email okay? Okay, so if there's any issues, you're following the process in which to file a grievance or to, submit things that have to be submitted. Those provisions are going to be at the end of your agreement, and those are the ones that are very, very, the language is pretty standard. And I think if you're looking at them with your fellow students, you're going to notice that those provisions are very similarly worded from agreement to agreement. All right, so what happens? Okay, after match day, what happens? You guys are already, some of you, if you're in your 4th year, you've already done this. Usually you'll hear within your program with 10 days. I know many of our Trinity programs will send things out within 1 or 2 days. Why? They want to congratulate you. It's a very exciting time. Okay, but I hear from program coordinators all the time is, holy cow, we have got to, we've got to get things moving. So what's likely going to happen is as soon as you hear from them, they're going to start flooding you with all of the requests of what has to take place now to get you onboarded. Okay, I was talking to a student the other day, had no idea that they actually started before July 1st. She was planning her wedding. Okay, and she said something about getting married June 21st, and I'm like, you realize, and she wasn't a 4th year. I said, you realize, because she's getting married June next year, I said, you realize that it isn't you start June 1st or July 1st. You have to go through orientation. You have to do your onboarding. So many of those activities happen the last 2 weeks in June. She had no idea. Okay, so you go through the match in March. Shortly thereafter, they send you all the process. Okay, I'll give you an example of one of our Trinity Health. They send you a welcoming email, and now they have a link to these onboarding processes. And this is where it gets a little confusing sometimes for students. Is onboarding means onboarding to the hospital. So you're going through human resources, or the buzzword right now is talent acquisition. And it's where you go to human resources and you're filling out, I-9s, which are immigration paperwork. You're filling out W-2 or W-4 so that they know the taxes. You're filling out, you're getting them a copy of your social security card and your driver's license. You're going to take care of all that. That's going to be kickstarted. And concurrently, you're going to be going through the onboarding program for the residency program. Okay, so I'll give an example. Our Grand Rapids, they will send you, it's called a checklist. Okay, and the checklist is an electronic checklist that tells you what we need. We need your personal information, your demographic information. We need your new address that you're going to be going to. Okay, we need any previous employment. We need to figure out your parking registration, your benefits. And this might be the time that they actually give you that benefit summary. That's very common. The benefits sometimes are discussed during interview days and sometimes when you get on site, but I think the most likely time you're going to get the full benefit summary is shortly after the match, when they say, here's our selections, in the next month, we need you to pick which health insurance you want, and they start onboarding you. Okay, they might be saying, we need to get a professional photo. We need you to write a bio for our website. We need to know what size lab coat you take, because we're putting lab coat orders in. And then there's the things like, hey, you need to apply for your educational limited license, your DEA license. You need to get maybe one of the requirements that I know you guys have to do, and I don't know if medical school helps you with this now, but you have to go through the controlled substance training and the human trafficking training. So a lot of times these are online courses. I know we have, there's like an hour and a half, tutorial that you have to do for some of our Grand Rapids programs. That it's just, you click on this button, you go through it, and at the end you get a certificate, you submit it, and that's one of the onboarding processes. All right. When you apply, you have to give a copy of your medical school diploma. Okay. You have to get your BLS, ACLS, any of the training certification cards, PALS, NAILS, those types of things that you have to submit as well. And why do I share this? Because I think you guys have gone through 4 long years, and you're eager, you've matched, and you're excited, but you're also a little bit relieved, and you're thinking, okay, I can relax a little now. I will tell you, from our program coordinators in GME programs, this is a very stressful time. And one of the reasons it's stressful and they try to get such a jump on it is because many of you want to check out. I had a medical student said, guess what? I'm going to hike the Appalachian Trail. I'm going to Europe for 3 months. Okay, or from March to July. Guess what? There's a lot to get done. And what I'm hearing from our programs is they push this out to you in March, right after the match. And what they need you to do is they need to get most of this stuff done between May 1 and June 1. Then you have a couple of weeks before you actually need to be showing up on site to go through the actual on-site orientation. Okay. The other thing that you get right after there is you're going to learn about how you're going to get your residency agreement. Because keep in mind, like we talked about today, you've already heard about the terms. You've already seen a copy of the contract either on their website or they gave it, because that's an institutional requirement, right? But what you're going to learn now is what is the process, and this is where it varies. I know most contracts for residency programs are put together by the legal counsel of the hospital. So maybe they, right after the match, they send their legal counsel, they populate the agreements, they get them back to the program coordinator, and the program coordinator sends them out. I know one of our programs, they're actually sent out by legal. They're not even sent out by the GME department. So in this communication that they're sending you, they're telling you, here's the onboarding process. You need to get your agreement. This is who you're going to get it from. Once you sign it, we sign it, it's back in your file and it's done. Okay, so a little bit of flurry of activity with a lot of requirements that need to get taken, really need to take place and get done prior to June 1. All right, I think there was a question or two. Let me look here. When do you recommend getting disability insurance and how much? Okay, great question. First of all, I'm impressed that you're even thinking about this, okay? What I would suggest is waiting till you get to your residency program and you go through the human resources onboarding program and you find out what they're offering you, okay? During residency program, what they offer you might be sufficient, okay, depending upon your personal life, depending upon your family life, okay? Short-term disability, an example of short-term disability would be you get 60% of your pay for 90 days up to a certain dollar amount. And at a resident salary, that might be sufficient for you, okay? I think this is what your question is, and this, I'm glad you brought it up because it's very important. When you are going from residency and you're taking your first position, you're going to be finding out those same questions about your future employer's disability plan. And I highly recommend during your program sometime, maybe towards the tail end, you go to your human resources department and you start working with their company, whether it's Prudential, it might be Hartford, Unum, Aflac. There's a number of companies where you can buy supplemental disability insurance or even life insurance. And what you do is you say, okay, now I know where I'm going. I know how much I'm going to make. I know what benefits. Now I need to get my supplemental insurance. And the reason I think you should get that squared away during residency or toward the end of your residency is because those plans are portable and you can buy it based on your future earnings. Okay. It's much cheaper to do when you're a resident. And if you do it right through their program, you will not have to go through a health assessment. Okay. All right. I think I had another question. Hopefully I answered that one. For residents with disabilities who require reasonable accommodations to fill their professional duties, are such accommodations covered by the contract provisions or is there a separate process? I probably have to look through. I think you're going to see, I can look through some agreements here, but I think you're going to see that in the agreement under the program around hospital responsibilities. But I think that's probably going to be driven more by the human resource policies. Okay, the ADA. If you look through the benefit package, there usually is going to be something that talks about accommodations through the ADA. So I think you're going to see a line or two in your contract that says they have to abide by the human resource policies, but the human resource policies that require any accommodations through the ADA is what's probably going to drive it. So to answer your question, yes, a contract provision, but the separate process is probably going to be a human resource policy or procedure. Okay, great questions. I'll pause for a second because I think we're getting close to the tail end here. And I'm just going to look at the other questions that were submitted because I had highlighted a few that I wanted to make sure that I addressed. One of the questions that was submitted ahead of time talked about the possibility of loan forgiveness. Now, this is not something that I think is discussed during medical school, okay? And I don't think this is something that's necessarily addressed as you are onboarded. From what I'm understanding, that this is not discussed specifically. But if you would like to, when you get into your program, if you would like to get into the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, that they will actually help you fill out, or they will fill out the forms for you. So I don't think it's part of their onboarding process where they say, here, let's do this. I think it's something that you're going to have to ask them, and then they will help coordinate for you. Okay. If you reach out about second consideration about specialty to the program director, but aren't able to secure a position in that specialty by upcoming year, can they refuse promotion if the contract is for cause? No, I don't believe so. In other words, you're on the fence of whether you want to stay in family medicine. You maybe apply or you don't match to that program. No, I don't believe that that would be for cause termination. Next question, what things will we need to clarify with HR rather than with the program? HR processes are going to be things like, immigration paperwork, tax paperwork, picking out your benefits, time off policies as to what their policy allows, picking your healthcare benefits, retirement plans. I think that's probably the bulk of the human resources pieces. The program pieces are going to be, what are the internal processes as far as what's the requirements, the job responsibilities, advancing up through. That's not human resources, that's built within the program. Okay, I think I answered both of those active questions. Had another question that said, is compensation negotiable in upper levels allowed based on performance? I thought that was a great question. I actually did a little research, and I will tell you, for the vast majority of programs that I've been in contact with, compensation is not negotiable, okay? And it's very set and it's very established. But I will tell you that I had talked to 2 programs, both were family medicine programs, and they had very little bonuses baked in, where the residents were eligible for doing non-clinical things, and it was related to citizenship, good citizenship. So it was for spearheading some committee meetings. In one instance, they were actually, believe it or not, doing some training on coding and audits, and they gave some small $150 incentives based on making it through some kind of some modules. If you did this, they weren't required for your program, but if you did it, they gave you kind of extra credit for it, and they give little $100 or $150 bonuses. So that was a very good question as well. I think I addressed, what other questions do you have? Any other questions at this time? I'm kind of looking through the thing. That's, what I did today is, hopefully you were looking at the agreements and you understand. Some of you had very specific questions. So I thought maybe you have a special circumstance and those things arise. And I will tell you, those special circumstances are things that continue all the way through residency and fellowship. And as you start your job search and you're looking at contracts and you're wondering what's in there, those types of things are going to come up. And my best advice for you is you have a one-on-one conversation I would probably start with the program coordinator, because program coordinators are the boots, the feet on the ground, and they can help you through navigating some of those very specific things that pertain to you. Another comment, which I thought was great when someone was talking about bonuses, chiefs and co-chiefs also receive a stipend or a bonus. Yes. Yep. And again, it's very specific. It'll tell you exactly what it is for. Good question. And then there might be a question in the chat as well. Okay, I think that was all of the questions. I think she was just reminding folks that they could ask questions. So I'll pause. I'm going to put on my screen my contact information. Hopefully you found this helpful. Again, I do resident outreach. So if any of you are going to a Trinity Health facility across the country, I will probably have an opportunity to talk to or speak to, as I try to make my rounds every year to all of our GME programs and talk to the residents about the next step. Not going into residency, but then I really start talking about your transition into practice and helping you get a better understanding about, looking for a job interviewing, what you're looking for in your employment contract. Why do physician residents carry disability insurance when other professions may not? You know what? I don't think it's really profession related. I think it depends upon your personal. You guys are high wage earners. And if you have a high wage and you are out of work and you're not able to work, what are you going to use to pay their bills? And oftentimes, I think another reason a lot of physicians might be the sole breadwinner in their family. Maybe they're not in a two-income family. So that might be one reason why you get it. But, I have friends that are electricians that have disability insurance because they're the breadwinner in their family. And if they can't work and they're not producing income, how are their bills going to get paid? So I don't think it's specific to physicians. Okay. How do we ask our program director about National Health Service Corps renewal for loan repayment program? I don't know if I understand your specific question, but National Health Service Corps loan repayment is not something that you seek while you're in residency. If I'm reading your question right, National Health Service Corps loan repayment, there's two things. You could be a scholar, which means they paid for your medical school, and when you get out, you're obligated to a eligible National Health Service Corps site with a HPSA, Health Professional Shortage Area score, high enough to accommodate you because you don't want to pay it back. The second thing is maybe you incurred loans and you want to go to a National Health Service Corps site that offers loan repayment. Your program is not going to be able to be helpful. That's where you're going to start. That's where me actually on the out end, as you start looking for your jobs, I can help you go through like a National Health Service Corps website where you can find sites that are eligible for loan repayment program. So hopefully I that made sense because the word renewal kind of threw me off. Thank you so much. You are welcome. And it said, will this presentation be available to be viewed at a later date? I will let that be answered, but the fact that it was recorded, I'm thinking that it will be.
Yes, it will be, Susan. We will post it on the AOGME website, www.acom.org/AOGME, and everybody who registered will get a link. So thank you.
Perfect. Well, I'll leave that screen up, and if there are no further questions, I'll just hold on for a couple of minutes, and if not, we'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar.
Well, thank you so much, Susan. I think that, well, you got one more if you want to take it, Susan.
One more question on the chat, it looks like, maybe. Do you recommend talking with a financial advisor or a loan advisor? Emily, I love your question. I love your proactive thinking, okay? To be honest with you, I don't think this is something that you have to do between now and the time you go into residency. But to be honest with you, I get asked all the time about legal advice. Do you think I should be seeing an attorney about this? And I always tell residents, I think you should be seeking advice for a financial advisor before you actually seek legal advice. So the answer is yes, you should be doing it. And to be honest with you, I would wait till you get to residency because sometimes this is a service that's offered through your human resources. It's one of your benefits. Maybe they work with Prudential. Maybe they work with AXA Advisors or the Raymond Group. So oftentimes, whoever that they work with for maybe their 403B or their 401k, where you can save pre-tax dollars for your retirement, oftentimes those group will offer financial services or financial advice for anyone that's an employee there. So absolutely, I recommend that you hook up with some sort of financial advisor. If you don't do it early on in your training, I definitely think you need to be doing it at the tail end of your training. Once you take your permanent position and you know where you're going, you know what benefits they offer, you know what your compensation and maybe your recruitment incentives are, that is the perfect time to seek a financial advisor that can really help you manage quadrupling your income in the boatload of debt that you're going to have to pay off, and really can make some good recommendations based on saving versus paying down high interest debt and whatnot. But absolutely, I'm glad, Emily, that you're thinking about that already. You might want to do it early because you kind of sound like you're ahead of the game. If not, as you creep toward the tail end of your training, I would definitely do it.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. This concludes our webinar. Just want to thank Susan again for the incredible amount of information and insight that you've shared, and thank you all for joining us. As I mentioned earlier, we will have this recording available on our website. And again, thank you and have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.